All right, welcome everybody to the Kubernetes community meeting. It is Thursday, August 30th. This is our weekly community meeting streamed to YouTube and recorded on YouTube. So please remember that this is a public meeting and being archived for all time. I will be your host today, George Castro from SEG Contributor Experience, and I work at Heptio. I'm looking for a note taker if someone wants to help hop into the notes. Otherwise, I'll do the best I can. With OSS North America and GopherCon happening, thanks everyone who was able to make it, because it seems like half the community is out today. So with that, we're going to have Dan from Elastic show us our first demo. Dan, you have 10 minutes.
Sorry, unmuting. Okay, so let me pop over into GitHub. Well, let me just go straight into it because we have 10 minutes. So I want to talk today about configuring log and metric collection with annotations. In the past, we've hard-coded patterns into the file beat and metric beat from Elastic. And that's a hassle because you have to have access to Kube system. And it's not easy for the DevOps folks. So now the new way of doing it is for you to add annotations when you create your manifests and do it that way. So I've got an Elasticsearch service instance in Elastic Cloud running, and I'm setting my oh geez, I'm not sharing, am I?
No, not yet.
Sorry. All right, that's a little bit better. So let me restart this scenario so you can see from the beginning. Sorry. Okay. So here's what we want to do. We want to have a dashboard that shows the state of the Kubernetes cluster, the Docker infrastructure, and the application. In order to do that, we need to have monitoring of logs and metrics. I was blathering on a little bit about annotations. So this is how we add annotations. This is the guest book example from the Kubernetes tutorials. So it's Apache and Redis. So this is how we add annotations to the front end deployment. And we specify that we want to use the module Apache 2, and we want to collect access logs and error logs from standard out and standard error. And then we go on and we say we want to collect Apache status metrics, and we want to get it from the host and port that's, for this particular pod in the deployment. So that's really easy because, Elastic provides modules for Apache and Redis and a bunch of other things, including Kubernetes and Docker. But they don't provide modules for your homegrown apps, right? So I'm also going to deploy the Hello Java app from Spring, and it's got its own log file format. So I'm going to add annotations for a custom parsing, and the logs there are multi-line. So I'm saying here that if the line starts with 4 digits dash 2 digits dash another 2 digits, so basically the date, 2019 0830, then start a new record, and everything that comes after that until you see this pattern again belongs to this record. So put everything from a multi-line log into one record so you can see it nicely in the UI. So I've got instructions here for deploying an Elasticsearch service instance, and a little bit about Katacoda. I'm not going to go through that. I think if you're not familiar with Katacoda already, you'll pick it up as I start. So the first thing I need to do is set up my secrets. get rid of this. It's a good thing you're not recording this and putting it on YouTube. All right, and I need Heapster and KubeState metrics for my metrics and the events. So I'm going to deploy those, and I know they'll deploy in the background. So I'm just going to skip quickly past that. The videos, I have them off to the side. Is that blocking the side of the terminal? Okay, it's good. Cool. Okay, now I'm going to deploy the guestbook. I've slightly modified the YAML from the tutorial to close off access to Apache server status from the outside world and a couple of other things. So basically, it's the Kubernetes YAML file, and I link to it in here. Okay, so finally we're going to deploy the beats. I'm deploying file beat and metric beat, and all of the configs are in the GitHub repo that's linked to from the agenda. So you know, you can see everything that I've done there and reproduce this on GKE or IBM Container Service or anywhere else. Okay, so I'm going to pop over into Kibana while this deploys because it's going to take about 90 seconds. And let's go to some dashboards. I've got other data coming in here so that, you know, I have something to show you in the meantime. So this is the Kubernetes overview. It gives, you know, the number of nodes, number of deployments, information about the various nodes. You can see I've got, over here, I've got 3 nodes from a Google cluster that I'm also using. And then Node 01 and Master are the ones in Katacoda. And I've got dashboards in here. All these dashboards are from the modules. I didn't have to create anything. An Apache dashboard shows what's going on. If I look out a little bit, there'll be more interesting information. The cluster I've got running in Google is exposed to the outside world, so there are people hitting it. And let me go back over here and see how we're doing. Okay, so FileBeat is running, so we should be getting data now from the guestbook application that's running locally. So we'll be getting the Apache logs and the Redis logs now. And okay, metric beat setup is done, so I can do the rest of the deployments and drive on. Okay, so at the very beginning, I showed the YAML for the deployment for my, I might as well get that started, for the Spring Hello World app and the annotations that I added in there. So right now, I'm using it without the annotations. So you'll see the logs that come out of the box, basically, if you don't add any hints on how to process it. So let me go over here. Discover, if you're not familiar with Elasticsearch and Kibana, the Discover application gives you all of the incoming messages, the logs and the metrics, etc. So let's look at the current time. And so these are the Hello Java logs, right? You can see these are the entries that we're getting, right? Obviously, these are parts of a full multi-line log message. So let's fix that. Again, when I deployed it at first, I used the YAML without the annotations, right? So let me show you what I changed here, right? So just diffing this. I added that multi-line pattern that I was talking about, and the next 2 lines are saying that if it's not a line that starts with the date, add it to the previous message. So let me deploy this. So when I deploy that, it updates the the deployment configuration, and it scales the deployment up and then back down, or down and then up, right? To get a fresh deployment. And
you have about 2 minutes.
Yep. All right, there we go. So this gives me the full message, right? So it's doing its thing. It's handling the multi-line now, instead of 150 individual lines for that message. It's there. So this is really handy. You know, some log shippers don't handle things like this out of the box. With 3 lines, I told it, go get these logs and handle the multi-lines. And do I take questions after I'm done?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay,
or you could
cool,
take them now.
cool. All right. Yeah. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them, or you can pop them in the chat. Let me bring the chat up.
Yep, I'm watching chat for you.
Okay.
Questions
Thanks.
going once, twice.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. If you want to deploy this yourself and you need a hand, just open an issue in that that repo, and I'll give you instructions to do it without the cloud instance.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. Release updates. Mr. Tim Pepper, are you on?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the first news this week, Code Slush has arrived, and then obviously that leads next week into Code Freeze starting on Tuesday. So compared to normal merge requirements on PRs, you will additionally be needing a milestone set, and particularly the v1.12 milestone set for your PRs, and then also a priority critical urgent. So we're into the phase here where only like really important stuff is merging. And then associated with that rigor on the part of folks merging, we also need people to not just make sure that their stuff gets merged, but then watch test results after merge for any potential destabilization from your code as it merged there. We're looking to really get things absolutely stable over the next couple of weeks because our release target is September 25th. That will be here very soon. And that's pretty much it.
All right. Any other release updates of any kind? All right. Great. Thanks, Tim. Moving on to Kep of the Week. Juan?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Right, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see the Cap for QControl Plugins. So we're going to briefly discuss the Cap. Pretty much what it is it introduces a new plugin system to QControl. It's a get style system, which means that it looks for plugins by finding executables on a user's path, and it's looking for a specific name format when trying to discover those. Pretty much the way we can sort of look at this mechanism is a way to take advantage of the existing commands that the core QControl binary provides, and essentially add more complexity on top of those. So, for example, as we see here, someone could, for example, make a plugin that takes advantage of the existing QControl config set context, and make a plugin that makes it a lot easier to switch namespaces, for example. So what this Cap does and does not do. So what it does is it solves, the current problem where there's an installation process needed, for plugins. So we don't want to have any of that. We want to relay all information given to QControl, as is. So flags, arguments, anything like that, the existing environment. We want it to be, passed on to the executable as is, and have it handle all of that information as is, as it sees fit. And then additionally, we do also want to provide a way to, in a limited manner, allow certain command paths to be overwritten. So as of right now, we don't allow any, but as we in the future, get requests from users to, for example, extend the create command, for example, we could allow that command path to be overridden. So someone could, in theory, in the future, create a plugin that adds a QControl create foo command, which could work with a custom resource definition, for example. What this mechanism does not do is it does not act as a plugin installer or wizard of any kind. So it does not do lifecycle management, and essentially it does not, hit registries and downloads plugins for you. You pretty much need to have plugins on your machine and on your path already. What this means is, though, that an additional piece could be stacked on top of this mechanism, such as Crew, for example, which does add these things on top of this mechanism. Yeah, I believe this goes over the cap. As part of this new proposed mechanism, we essentially wanted to provide some sort of utilities to plugin writers to make their life easier when writing plugins. So we know, for example, in QControl commands, we currently essentially we have utilities and we have existing code that we use to obtain a user's kubeconfig, to then use that kubeconfig to obtain REST client configuration, and then to use that REST client configuration to then hit the API server. So we want to share that with plugin authors as well to make their life easier so that they don't have to reinvent that wheel. And we have essentially come up with a CLI runtime repository, which is currently in staging, but we hope to have a separate repo for this very soon. Obviously what this means is that plugins that want to take advantage of this CLI runtime set of tools need to be written in Go. However, that being said, the existing plugin mechanism does not require that plugins are written in Go. You can write them in whatever language you want, so long as you have an executable file, it'll run. So if you choose to write them in Go, you'll be able to take advantage of these tools. You'll be able to handle users' kubeconfig files and do all that stuff for free, essentially. It provides a printing stack as well. Yeah, feel free to check it out. So as part of showcasing how to use this CLI runtime, we have created a sample plugin, which is also in the staging repo at the moment, but we hope to have a separate repo that the publisher bot can update pretty soon. So this sample plugin, if you recall back to what if someone created a plugin that would allow users to more conveniently switch a namespace, this sample plugin does exactly that. And it essentially attempts to showcase, using the CLI runtime and, the plugin, using plugin conventions that we want to be established. And so if I have some quick time for a demo, I'd like to show you, how the new plugin mechanism works with the sample plugin. So I'll go ahead and share my terminal now, and hopefully you should be seeing it. Let me know if you cannot see it. Okay, perfect. So essentially, as part of this mechanism, we have provided a subcommand called plugin list. So we're reusing the old plugin command to just make it a sort of namespace for plugin utilities. So QControl Plugin list will tell you every plugin that's on your path. It'll give you warnings. As you can see, I have nothing on my path that resembles a plugin, so QControl sees nothing. I will go ahead and, I conveniently have a compiled sample plugin here. So I will go ahead and install it. And by install it, I mean I will simply just move it to somewhere in my path. Could be anywhere in my path. And so if we run that command again, plugin list, you will see that indeed it is seen by QControl. So now running this plugin, what does it do? Very simple. If you just run QControl NS, for example, it'll just tell you what namespace you're currently in, and this uses entirely your kubeconfig. There are no calls being sent to the API server for any of this. You can list all of the namespaces that are being used in your kubeconfig, and you can also change your namespace to something else. So before we do that, you can see, for example, that I have this set of pods. And if I change my namespace to something like my project, then I'll get a confirmation message that I've switched my namespace, and I'll be able to list pods now, and I'll get all the pods from that namespace. It also supports any flags that are relevant to configuration. So I can do kubens namespace, and it supports that to change my namespace. I can go ahead and switch back to default and get pods, and I get pods in my default namespace, for example. And it also supports flags like user. So I can what this essentially does is it takes the existing current context as a sort of blueprint, and then it appends to it or adds to it the flag values that you've provided. So for auth infos, for example, it'll overwrite the auth info with the user value you provide, and then at the very end, you can provide user, you can provide context, cluster, and so at the very end, once it computes the brand new context to go in your kubeconfig, it attempts to see if one already exists, and if it does, it just switches that to your current context. If it doesn't exist, it creates a new context and switches to that. So you can think of this as a way to more efficiently manage your contexts, and yeah, sort of an easier way to persist your namespaces as well. One more thing I want to show you is, so going back to the QControl plugin list command, it does warn you, for example, if you have a plugin that overrides another plugin, and also if, for example, you have a plugin that overrides an existing kubectl command, it'll warn you as well. Since right now we do disallow pretty much every command path from being extended by a plugin, it'll just give you a warning. So if we rename our kubectl ns executable to kubectl version, for example, not only will you see that we are able to, well, we would be able to access it under kubectl version if we were able to extend that path. But since we're not, we will get a nice warning under here telling us that we cannot do that. And yes, it is definitely possible to essentially change the command path of your plugin by simply renaming it. So you can do something like foo, and that's backwards. Yeah, so if we rename it to something like kubectl foo, we are now able to access the same plugin under foo. So users can customize, if you will, their plugin names like that. At this time, I'd like to take any questions if there are any.
You have one question in chat. Tim asks, how does it deal with folks who distribute tools via container?
Sure. So by this, I'm guessing you probably either copy your tools from the container or you work inside the container. I'm not entirely sure what the scope of that is.
Tim, are you on to answer the follow-up?
A lot of folks will distribute their tooling via containers. So is there a recommended approach like drop a soft link, which calls Docker run or something? What is the recommended path forwards for folks who want to distribute via that means? Because the whole promise of containers is that we can distribute this in a non-distro binding type of way, right? So if a person needs all these set of libraries, they develop a Python plugin and they want to use a very specific version of Python with all the other dependencies that come along with it. What's the recommended approach there?
Sure, and so hopefully I'm understanding the scope correctly. But if you were to distribute plugins via container, yeah, basically either by running the container and having symlinks, for example, works, or maybe you have a script that copies tools to the user's path. That also works. But yeah, essentially, so long as any of these tools are on the user's path, you'll be able to use them as normal.
A meta plugin, right?
Yes.
A meta plugin that looks for Docker tags.
Yeah, you definitely have that.
Images.
You could have a plugin that installs plugins.
Even more indirection.
Definitely. Could be a challenge to see how many levels of indirection we can achieve with plugins. But yes, a plugin that does this for a user is definitely possible. And we do encourage this, actually. People want to build on top of that. Yeah, hopefully I've answered your question fully. if there's any more questions, I'll gladly take them as well.
Any more questions? Yes, Chris asked, with the new plugin implementation, do you have to use a CLI-runtime package, or is that just meant to help implement new plugins?
Sure. So that package is only meant to help you. You do not have to use it. And as I said, you can write plugins in any language you see fit. All you need is an executable. And so this package is mainly just, it aims to address the sort of the missing set of utilities that plugins would usually get in other ecosystems. So as you can see, that because the mechanism is so simple, it does not provide any benefit to executables other than being under the QControl namespace, and obviously guarantees that if you're being executed, you're inside of a Kubernetes ecosystem. But aside from that, there's nothing really that your executable gets for free. So we are shipping these tools to encourage you to, if you're ready to go, you'll get the same conventions that you would get with any other kubectl command, and you'll have an easier time obtaining configuration and talking to the server.
Yeah, and then the final question is Dan's. Is the file name spec cube dash and then whatever?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right, and that's it for questions. Thanks, Juan. Those of you that are working on caps, we try to review a cap every week as part of this community meeting. So if you would like to talk about your cap, to kind of shop it around, I guess, sync with SIG PM. That's Jace and Caleb Miles, and they will get you on the schedule so you can show off your cap. And with that, moving on to the SIG updates. We only have one SIG update today, and that's going to be SEG Cluster Lifecycle with Mr. Tim St. Clair.
So I'll briefly share my screen. Just to give an overview, there's been a lot of sub-projects that SEG Cluster Lifecycle has started to sponsor. And I wanted to just provide general awareness of where these sub-projects live and where folks can find it. There is a separate Kubernetes SIGs org. And underneath that SIGs orgs, some of the sub-projects that I've listed either have been an incubator for a while, have moved on over. One of the longstanding ones that have been around for a long time is the KubeDM DIM cluster. I know there's a lot of ongoing work here to try and refactor this from the test infra side of things. And I know that they're working together with the folks who have this separate repository. Another major sub-project for SEG Cluster Lifecycle is the Cluster API. And the Cluster API itself is almost more of a meta framework than an actual API itself. It has an API, but it provides tooling to integrate to declaratively manage clusters via an API-driven spec defined by the Cluster API. So there are a number of co-owned sub-projects. I say co-owned because providers such as AWS will co-own it with the other SIGs, including GCP, OpenStack, and vSphere. So as you can see, we're kind of getting into the space where we're adding a lot of sub-projects underneath the Kubernetes SIGs that's sponsored by SEG Cluster Lifecycle. So over time, we might give a broader update. With regards to the Cluster API, we are currently planning for a alpha release in the 1.12 cycle at the end of 1.12. Cluster API release has always been planned to be decoupled from the Kubernetes release, so folks can do that independently. So it will probably span after the release cycle. Some of the major things that we're currently working on for the 1.12 release that we want to get broader community involvement in is the switching of aggregation API as the default back to CRDs. That was the original implementation that went back and forth a couple of times. And that's pretty much the major thing. If you want to track details on where folks are at with the Cluster API, there is a separate Cluster API repository. If you look at the issues, there is there's the separate milestones that folks have laid out there too. So the initial alpha implementation is our planned release for this cycle. Last but not least, SEG Cluster Lifecycle sponsors the KubeDM project as one of its major sub-projects that it works on. We have not given a major update for a while now, so I wanted to just give general awareness with regards to major features that were added in 1.11. A big shout out to Michael Taufin for all the work he did with dynamic kubelet configuration. We have enabled via FeatureGate dynamic kubelet configuration inside of kubeadm, and we have a simplified version of kube configuration enabled by default inside of the kubeadm. So this allows you to programmatically change your configuration for the kubelets on your cluster, which is super useful. We made changes in the last cycle to go to V1 Alpha 2 for our configs. Our goal is to get our configuration to a well-defined beta, and then kubeadm will go to GA. So part of our work that has been ongoing for a while is slight modifications over time to support refactoring of the configuration, and so that we can support it for the long haul. And this was one of the steps forwards, and we continued that step forwards in this cycle with making a change to V1 Alpha 3. And we will continue this again, probably in the next cycle, to get to beta. So our overall goal is to try and hit beta in 1.13. We'll see how that goes. As folks know, things always change over time, and bugs are found and other issues. Another important major feature that was promoted both in the last cycle and this one is updated instructions for deploying of HA clusters using kubeadm. We are officially sanctioning and supporting the installation instructions that are there. We have multiple configurations that we outline and support for that, and we are planning to update the instructions with new options that we have to simplify it. And again, over time, we will simplify the UX to make it easier and easier to deploy and manage highly available MVP style Kubernetes clusters. Last but not least, our charter has been up in LGTM by several folks. We're just waiting on final approval from Brian Grant. And if folks want to know more about what SEG Cluster Lifecycle is working on, or projects that we currently have in flight, or all the other details, we highly recommend looking at the community page. We do try to keep this up to date, so all the meeting notes and recordings and who are the SIG leads and all the other details can be found there. That is all I have. Are there any questions?
Any questions, either in chat or speak up? Going once, going twice. Okay, sold. Thank you, Tim. All right, moving on to the announcements. We're going to do the shout outs real quick, and then so we can move on to the election updates. Neolit123 would like to do a big shout out to Ben the Elder for helping newcomers to understand how the Kubernetes test infrastructure works. Ben the Elder would like to shout out back to Neolit123 for help for keeping after fixes for kubeadmin end-to-end testing. Lubomir's work should help stabilize this a bit. Ta-da emoji. Nikita wants to shout out to C. Blecker for everything that he does for the community, especially for keeping the project sane around the tooling, +1 to that one. Paris and C. Blecker would like to shout out to Dims, Neolit123, and Nikita for adding labels to owners' files. And you can click through the pull request there if you want to check it out. And I'd like to thank everyone involved in our infrastructure teams as a whole for transitioning the CI/CD infrastructure to the CNCF. I'm sure you've all read about that this week. And moving on to an election update. Is Paris on? Okay, I guess that means I'll be doing the election update. No worries, she's at a conference. So here's where we're standing out currently with the election process. So we have 15 days until the next important deadline, which is all the nominees need to submit their basically their platforms, which are little 300-word snippets that go into the repository and say, you know, why you would want to vote for me, things of that nature. And the important thing for you, if you're not running, but you're planning on hoping to vote in the election, is we need to get the eligible voting forms in by that date, and I'll get to that in a second. So there are currently 6 people who are officially nominated and have accepted, and those people over the next 2 weeks will check in their biographies into the repository, which are linked below. In the notes, you'll see there's a list. It takes you to a file in GitHub in the community repo called VotersMD. If your GitHub name is not on this list, you are currently not able to vote in the election, okay? So if you continue, there's a link here that says, please fill out this form. We have a form for those of you who don't have the prerequisite 50 GitHub activities needed to automatically vote. So if, for example, you were a SIG lead, or you're like, you're doing something for Kubernetes that doesn't exactly automatically get you 50 GitHub commits, you need to fill out the form, and you basically say in there all the stuff that you've been doing in Kubernetes over the past year, and then we'll look at it and either make a determination whether you can vote or not in this election. Just because you voted last year does not mean you automatically will vote this year. So please remember to check out the list of voters, MD. It's in the repo. It's all public. And if not, just click through the form. The form takes 2 or 3 minutes. You give us your GitHub name, your email, and then what you've done over the past year, and then we'll look at that, and then you'll hear from us. If you keep following in the notes, the following 3 documents are important. There's a steering committee charter, which kind of explains to you how the whole thing is put together. And then the steering committee, who's actually on it currently, and then the election process, and then the voters guide. So particularly the last 2, the election process and the voters guide, will give you all of the deadlines that you need for the entire election, which isn't happening until October. So what we're doing now is we're grabbing nominees, and then the first deadline, and every single week, and from now on, you'll get a status during this meeting, and we'll basically send an email version of everything that I've said here to the Kubernetes dev list every week from now on, giving you a status update on what's going on with the election. So please make sure to check out the voters guide and the election process. And all 4 documents are just good to read if you're really into Kubernetes governance. Is there anybody that's totally confused or has any questions about the election process? Okay, if at any time you have any questions about the election process, you can mail community@kubernetes.io, and I'll make sure I put this in the notes with any questions that you might have on the election process. If you're not sure how anything works, in the past, we've had people just mail the developer list asking questions. That's totally fine. These are all going to be transparent and open and things like that. So don't worry about, am I asking a question and bothering someone? Please absolutely ask a question if you're not sure on how the process works.
Did we,
George?
George, did we create a Slack channel for election?
We haven't really. Should we? I mean, I
don't know. It's an idea. I mean, instead of so people can ask questions there.
Sure.
I don't know. Worth considering anyway.
Sure. I'll write it down in the notes, and then it doesn't hurt to idle in one more channel for us. So
I also clarified in chat that it's not commits. It's actually 50 contributions, and contributions are measured over a variety of different ways. So people don't necessarily have to be code committers to vote. It's really about activity within the project that shows that you're engaged and active and all those things. I just want to clarify that.
Yes, thank you. That is correct. Anybody else have any questions before we move on? Okay, next item. It's me again. It's one of those days. Real quick, I just wanted to announce something that we've been talking about in contributor experience for a while, but hadn't got around to. Just give me a second here. Can everybody see my screen? So if you go to discuss.kubernetes.io, which is our community forum, and click on role board here. So one thing we've had people ask us in the past, hey, how can I get someone to help? And then we get new contributors who are like, I don't know how to find help. So between Paris and Brian Grant, and we looked at old notes that people had taken during the leadership summits in the past, someone had mentioned, wouldn't it be great if we had like a job board, but for contributors to like find places to help and for SIGs to post where they need help. So I basically set one up. We call it the contributor role board. And the way it's set up is you can click new topic. And if you're a person looking to help and join a SIG, you can fill out a little template that I've written for you here with your skills and how much time you have. Or if you're a SIG looking for help, you can post for basically contributor roles that you're looking for in your SIG. So I've set a few examples here. So for example, in contributor experience, we would love if there was someone who would help us maintain the Stack Overflow tag for Kubernetes. So I've kind of written out, it looks like a little job posting here. So if you're a SIG and you have roles that you need help in, it's a good place. We are currently looking for people to start. I have a few examples here, but I'm kind of looking for people and SIGs to start posting different positions. Those of you SIGs that use shadow roles, especially like release, where you have a person who's new and is kind of following along with a new person, this would be a perfect place to post shadow roles. And if you're a volunteer and you have skills and you're looking for something, please feel free to post here. One of the, let me just stop my share here. One of the issues we've been struggling with is we want to make roles easy for people to get into, but at the same time, we don't want the role board to be nothing but, hey, our SIG needs a note taker. So we've left some recommendations there about giving people autonomy, kind of think of meaty roles that a new user could or new contributor could get into, but not be set up for failure, right? So SIGs, please have a think about roles that you could submit to this. Let us know. We can change any of the wording here to help you out. So that's available. And those of you, if you have people who are just starting to get into Kubernetes and don't really have a place to go, have them post here, and then we'll try to help match people with SIGs. Does anyone have any questions on that? All right, moving on. The Stack Overflow top users. So these are the top 10 users for August that contributed the most on Stack Overflow. We like to give them a shout out every month. That's Matthew L. Daniel, Ryan Dawson, Marcin Romeskewitz, Radic Goblin, Kun Lee, Nicola Ben, Jack Storm, Vas, Harshal Shah, and Mike Joe. Thanks for helping out on Stack Overflow. With that, Ihor, I believe you have the final announcement.
Yes, and the final announcement is that we finally have the suggested by the community Kubernetes branded slide deck template. So if you're a person who makes presentations at some public meetings about Kubernetes, or just would like to make the SEG update using the new Kubernetes branded slide template instead of the generic Google Slides, please check the links in the meeting notes, and you will find the link to the new template. Especially like to thank Alex Contini from CNCF. She developed this amazing slide template. Tim Hocken made his amazing suggestions there, and SEG contributor experience was the driver for this initiative, and they thumbs up to move with this forward. And let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to incorporate any updates there if you have anything to add there, or if you'll see any bugs, just also let me know.
All right. Any questions for Ihor? Any last minute announcements before we break? All right, everybody, have 17 minutes of your day back. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating. See you all next week.